Victories of the day. March 16th. Victories of the day, March 16th. 1. The launch of the first liquid-fueled rocket, March 16, 1926. The accomplishment: Robert H. Goddard successfully launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket in Auburn, Massachusetts. It reached an altitude of 41 feet and flew for 2.5 seconds. Previous failures: before 1926, rockets used solid gunpowder, similar to fireworks, which was unstable, impossible to throttle, and lacked the energy density required to leave Earth's atmosphere. Scientific consensus, including a famous 1920 New York Times editorial, ridiculed the idea that a rocket could function in a vacuum. The system and components: the rocket, nicknamed NEL, utilized a mix of liquid oxygen, LOX, and gasoline. It featured a complex system of feed lines, a combustion chamber, and an innovatively placed nozzle at the top of the frame. Theoretical framework: Goddard applied the Laval Nozzle principle to convert high-pressure gas into high-velocity exhaust. He proved through vacuum chamber tests that rockets do not need air to push against, but rather operate on Newton's third law, equal and opposite reaction. Current state and application: every modern spacecraft, from the Saturn V that went to the Moon to the SpaceX Falcon 9, is a direct descendant of Goddard's 1926 flight. He effectively turned science fiction into aerospace engineering. 2. The resolution of Fermat's last theorem, March 16, 1995. The accomplishment: mathematician Andrew Wiles submitted his corrected, final proof of Fermat's last theorem, solving a riddle that had remained unsolved for 358 years. Previous failures: since Pierre de Fermat wrote the theorem in a book margin in 1637, thousands of mathematicians had failed to prove it. Wiles himself presented a version in 1993 that contained a critical gap, forcing him to spend another year in isolation to find the missing link. The system and components: the proof utilized a bridge between two seemingly unrelated fields, elliptic curves and modular forms. Theoretical framework: the theorem states that no three positive integers a, b, and c satisfy the equation a(n plus b(n equals c(n) for any integer value of n greater than 2. Wiles proved the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture, which mathematically linked the shapes of elliptic curves to patterns in modular forms, thereby proving Fermat's theorem by extension. Current state and application: this achievement revolutionized number theory. The techniques developed to solve it are now foundational in modern cryptography, securing digital communications across the globe. 3. The completion of the first human chromosome map, March 16, 1992. The accomplishment: researchers at the Genethon laboratory in France announced the completion of the first physical map of a human chromosome, chromosome 21. Previous failures: early genetic research was limited to genetic linkage maps, which only showed the relative order of genes. Scientists lacked a physical map that provided the actual distances and landmarks necessary to navigate the 3 billion letters of the human genome. The system and components: the team used yeast artificial chromosomes, YACs, to clone and organize large fragments of human DNA into a searchable library. Theoretical framework: this was a pilot project for the Human Genome Project. It utilized shotgun sequencing logic, breaking the DNA into pieces, mapping where they overlapped, and reassembling the landscape of the chromosome. Current state and application: mapping chromosome 21 was critical for understanding Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. Today, this work allows for precision medicine and gene therapy techniques like CRISPR. For the discovery of the first island of stability evidence, March 16, 1999. The accomplishment: physicists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, JINR, in Russia announced the discovery of an isotope of element 114, flerovium, that lasted significantly longer than expected. Previous failures: most superheavy elements, those beyond uranium, are extremely unstable, decaying in tiny fractions of a second. This made them nearly impossible to study and suggested that there was a limit to the size of an atom. The system and components: the U400 cyclotron, which fired a beam of calcium-48 ions at a plutonium-244 target. Theoretical framework: the nuclear shell model. It predicts that certain magic numbers of protons and neutrons fill shells within the nucleus, creating an island of stability where superheavy elements can exist for seconds or even minutes. Current state and application: this discovery proved that the periodic table could be extended much further than previously thought. It guides modern research into new materials and the fundamental forces that hold the nucleus together. 5. The Gemini8 emergency docking milestone, March 16, 1966. The accomplishment: Neil Armstrong and David Scott performed the first ever docking of two spacecraft in orbit, Gemini8 and the Agena target vehicle. Previous failures: earlier space missions were isolated flights. To go to the Moon, NASA had to prove that two objects moving at 17,500 miles per hour could meet and physically connect. Without this ability, a lunar module could never return to its command module. The system and components: the Gemini docking mechanism and the orbital attitude and maneuvering system, OAMS. Theoretical framework: this was a real-world test of orbital mechanics and relative motion. Pilots had to learn that to catch up to an object in orbit, you don't speed up, you slow down to drop into a lower, faster orbit, then pop up to meet the target. Current state and application: this successful docking, and the subsequent emergency recovery from a stuck thruster, validated the math used for every mission to the International Space Station, ISS, today. 6. Dedicatee of the Day, Robert H. Goddard, 1882–1945. Robert H. Goddard was often called the Moon Man by a skeptical press, but he spent his life patenting over 200 innovations that are still used in rockets today, including gyroscopic control and multistage engines. His 1926 launch was not a lucky accident, it was the result of thousands of hours of cooling system tests and mathematical modeling of fuel-to-weight ratios. Goddard was notoriously private, often working in the desert to avoid prying eyes. His legacy on March 16 reminds us that true scientific revolution often happens quietly, far from the spotlight, before changing the world forever. Victories of the Day. March 16.